I was arranging fresh flowers in our dining room when I noticed the date on my watch. 40 years to the day since I'd walked down the aisle with Robert. 40 years of memories in this sprawling colonial home in Oakridge. 40 years of holidays. Around this very table. 40 years of building a life while slowly losing myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Little did I know that by sunset, I'd be sitting alone in a hotel room, scrolling through offshore account balances that not even my tax attorney husband knew existed. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. My friends, the ones I still have, call me Ellie. I spent 4 decades being the quintessential corporate wife, the steady force behind Robert's meteoric rise from junior associate to managing partner at Boston's most prestigious law firm. I planned the dinner parties that secured his promotions. I raised our children so he could work 80-hour weeks. I orchestrated our social life so meticulously that other wives in our circle called me the general behind my back. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that beneath my perfect hostess exterior beat the heart of a financial savant who had once been the youngest female analyst at Morgan Stanley, before leaving it all behind for marriage. And while I was picking out china patterns and planning Christmas parties, I was also quietly moving money into accounts that would one day become my salvation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with a pain in my chest. Not the metaphorical kind, though there'd be plenty of that soon enough. No. This was the sharp, breathtaking kind that sent me to the emergency room on a Tuesday morning in April. Robert was in the Bahamas on what he called a legal conference, and neither of my children answered when I called. In the end, I drove myself to Massachusetts General and sat alone in the waiting room for 3 hours, scrolling through social media photos of my husband on a yacht, definitely not at any conference I could recognize. The doctor called it a minor cardiac event, a warning sign, not a full-blown heart attack. I was lucky, she said. With medication and lifestyle changes, I might never have another episode. She handed me a folder of information, prescriptions, and follow-up appointments, then asked if someone could drive me home. My husband will pick me up, I lied, then called an Uber. I placed my diagnosis paperwork on the marble kitchen island, the centerpiece of the gourmet kitchen Robert had insisted on renovating last year, though he'd never cooked a meal in his life. For 3 days, the folder sat untouched as my family orbited around it, pouring coffee, grabbing breakfast bars, complaining about their days. Not once did anyone ask why I'd been to the hospital or notice the prescription bottles lined up beside the folder. On the 4th day, when my daughter Catherine dropped by unannounced with my grandchildren, her eyes skimmed over the folder to land on her watch instead. "Mom, I need a huge favor. Emma has ballet at 4, but I have to show a house to clients who just flew in from Chicago. Can you take her?" I'd asked Dad, but he's playing golf with clients. "I have a doctor's appointment at 3:30, I said, my hand unconsciously moving to my chest. Catherine's face fell into familiar lines of irritation. "Seriously? Your hair appointment can't be rescheduled?" Emma's been working on this recital for months, and the instructor is strict about attendance. "It's not a hair appointment," I started to explain, but Catherine was already texting furiously. "Fine, I'll see if Vanessa can take her. She's never too busy to help out." She looked up, adding with a pointed smile, "You know, for someone who's not even family, that woman is more reliable than most relatives." Vanessa, my best friend since college, the one who'd held my hand through 2 difficult pregnancies, the one who'd built a successful chain of beauty salons while I played corporate wife, the one who'd been spending an awful lot of time with Robert lately. "I'm not feeling well," I said quietly. "The doctor appointment is a follow-up to my ER visit earlier this week." Catherine's head snapped up, her expression shifting to one of mild concern. "ER? What happened?" "I had chest pains. They think it might be—" Her phone buzzed, cutting me off. Oh, thank God, Vanessa can take Emma. Crisis averted. She gathered her purse, already moving toward the door. Try taking a walk, Mom. No offense, but you've seemed a bit off lately. Probably just need some fresh air and exercise. The door closed behind her, and I stood in my immaculate kitchen, surrounded by gleaming appliances and absolute silence. I made my appointment on time. The cardiologist was thorough and kind, adjusting my medications and suggesting a cardiac rehabilitation program. When I mentioned that I hadn't told my family the details of my condition yet, she raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Mitchell, support systems are crucial for recovery. Your family should know what you're going through. I nodded automatically but said nothing. On the drive home, I took a detour, parking outside the small branch of Coastal Atlantic Bank, where I'd opened my first separate account 25 years earlier. Back then, it had been a small contingency fund. Mad money, my mother would have called it. Over the years, it had evolved into something far more substantial, managed through quiet meetings with a financial advisor named Margaret Wilson, who had become both mentor and friend. I didn't go inside the bank that day. I simply sat in my car, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Margaret years ago, when Robert made partner. Every woman should have money her husband doesn't know about, she'd said, not looking up, from the paperwork we were reviewing. Not because all men are untrustworthy, but because all people are unpredictable. Security isn't just about how much you have, it's about who controls it. Under Margaret's guidance, I'd opened my first offshore account when Andrew was in middle school and Catherine was still in elementary. Nothing illegal, all properly reported on my separate tax returns that Robert, ironically, never bothered to review. I trust you, Ellie, he'd say each year, signing wherever I indicated without reading a word. You handle the household, I'll handle the big stuff. The household he dismissed so casually had grown to include investments in Singapore, the Cayman Islands, and Switzerland. While Robert climbed the corporate ladder, I'd quietly built a financial safety net that would now become my lifeline. When I pulled into our driveway that evening, Robert's Audi was parked beside a familiar red Mercedes, Vanessa's car. I found them in the kitchen, laughing over a bottle of the expensive Cabernet I'd been saving for our anniversary. Emma sat at the island, homework spread before her, while Robert and Vanessa huddled over his phone, shoulders touching. Ellie! Vanessa's smile was radiant as she moved to embrace me. How was your appointment? Catherine mentioned you weren't feeling well. It was fine, I said, accepting her hug with practiced grace. Just routine. Robert barely looked up. Emma's recital went well. Vanessa recorded it for you. Not a question about my health, not a moment of concern. Thanks for taking her, I said to Vanessa, setting my purse down on the counter. Inside was my new prescription, the rehabilitation schedule, and a pamphlet titled Living with Heart Disease, a guide for patients and families. Any time, Vanessa beamed, her hand resting briefly on Robert's arm. That's what friends are. Horror, I made dinner while they finished the wine, their conversation flowing around me like I was invisible. Emma occasionally glanced up from her homework, but Robert and Vanessa remained absorbed in each other, discussing people I didn't know and parties I hadn't attended. As I chopped vegetables, I calculated the current value of my offshore investments, close to $3.4 million at last check. Not counting the domestic accounts or the rental properties in Brookline that I'd inherited from my grandmother and kept in my maiden name. Robert had always been dismissive of those properties, calling them more trouble than they're worth, when I'd suggested we move into one after the children left home. Your medication is on the counter, I said to Robert as I served dinner. The doctor doubled your cholesterol dose. He waved dismissively. I'll deal with it later. You haven't been taking them regularly, I noted. The bottle's still almost full from last month. Not everyone's obsessed with pill schedules like you are, Ellie, he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Some of us are too busy living. Vanessa laughed, that musical laugh that had once made her the center of attention at every gathering. "Robert, be nice. Ellie just wants you healthy and around for a long time." The way she said his name, the slight emphasis, the warmth should have been my first real clue. Instead, I simply served the meal I'd prepared and listened as they dominated the conversation. After dinner, after Vanessa had left and Emma was upstairs doing homework, I tried one more time to tell Robert about my diagnosis. "I had some tests." "Done," I began, loading the dishwasher while he scrolled through emails on his phone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The doctor is concerned about—" "Can this wait?" he interrupted, not looking up. "I've got a crisis with the Jenkins merger, and frankly, I don't have the bandwidth for another health kick right now." I closed the dishwasher, wiped my hands, on a towel, and looked at my husband of 40 years. His hair had gone silver at the temples, giving him that distinguished look that seemed to only enhance his appeal. He'd kept his figure thanks to golf and the personal trainer I'd arranged for him. He still turned heads when we entered a room. But in that moment, I suddenly couldn't remember why I'd spent 4 decades organizing my life around his needs. "It can wait," I said quietly. Later that night, I lay awake listening to Robert's even breathing beside me. My chest felt tight again, but this time I recognized it as anxiety rather than a cardiac symptom. I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to my office. Really just a corner of the family room where I kept household files and decorative boxes that matched the decor. I powered up my laptop and checked my accounts. The numbers glowed reassuringly. On the screen, proof that while I'd been playing the role of supportive wife, I'd also been quietly ensuring my independence. I hadn't touched these accounts in years, just watched them grow through carefully selected investments and compounding interest. The next morning, Robert left early for a breakfast meeting. I spent the day as I typically did, grocery shopping, dropping off dry cleaning, and preparing for the dinner party we were hosting that weekend for his colleagues. While selecting wine at our favorite shop, I ran into Patricia Wells, the wife of Robert's law school roommate. "Ellie," she approached, with air kisses and a sympathetic smile. "I've been meaning to call you. How are you holding up with everything?" "Everything?" I echoed, mystified. Her expression shifted to embarrassment. "Oh, I just meant, with Robert retiring soon. Mark says the firm is already feeling the loss. 40 years is such a long time to be anywhere." "Robert's not retiring," I said slowly. "He hasn't mentioned any plans to step down." Patricia's discomfort was palpable now. "I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood. Mark mentioned something about Robert making changes, looking at property in Florida." She trailed off, then quickly changed the subject. "How's Catherine? I heard Heather's lifestyle blog is really taking off." We chatted for a few more minutes before parting ways, but Patricia's words lingered. Robert hadn't mentioned retirement or Florida. In fact, he'd been talking about taking on more high-profile cases next year. When I arrived home, I found a small jewelry box on the kitchen counter, wrapped in silver paper with no card attached. Thinking it might be an early anniversary gift, I opened it to find a pair of sapphire earrings, not my birthstone, but Vanessa's. Nestled underneath was a receipt from the Harbor View Hotel on Martha's Vineyard, dated for the weekend Robert had claimed to be at a legal conference in Providence. I stood there holding physical proof of what I'd been too blind, or perhaps too practical, to acknowledge. My husband of 40 years was having an affair with my best friend, and apparently planning a retirement I knew nothing about. The pain in my chest returned, sharper this time. I leaned against the counter, focused on my breathing, and thought not of confrontation or tears, but of Margaret Wilson's steady voice from all those years ago. "The best weapon in any battle is the one your opponent doesn't know you have." I carefully rewrapped the earrings, returned them exactly as I'd found them, and went upstairs to our bedroom. In the walk-in closet, behind my winter sweaters, was a fireproof box containing my most important documents: birth certificate, passport, and the details of accounts Robert had never questioned. I updated the password to my private email, then sent a message to my financial advisor requesting an urgent meeting. That evening, when Robert returned, I greeted him with his favorite scotch and a warm smile. We discussed his day. I mentioned running into Patricia without revealing her slip, and we finalized plans for the weekend's dinner party. I played my role perfectly: the attentive wife, the flawless hostess, the woman who had built her life around his success. But as we prepared for bed, I looked at him with new eyes. Not with the anger of betrayal, though that simmered beneath the surface, but with the cool assessment of someone seeing clearly for the first time in decades. "You seem distracted," he said, noticing my gaze. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I replied. "Just thinking about how quickly time passes. 40 years of marriage this month." He nodded absently, already reaching for his phone to check emails one last time. "We should do something special. Maybe that restaurant downtown you like." The restaurant I liked. As if my preferences were an afterthought he occasionally remembered to indulge. As if 40 years could be commemorated with an overpriced meal and obligatory conversation. "That would be lovely," I said, and turned away from the stranger in my bed. The dinner party that Saturday was a masterpiece of social engineering, my specialty after decades as the wife of Robert Mitchell, Esquire. 12 guests, including the firm's managing partners and their spouses, gathered around our dining room table, enjoying the catering I'd arranged and the wine I'd selected. I wore a blue dress that complemented my eyes and played the perfect hostess, refilling glasses and guiding conversation with practiced ease. Robert basked in admiration all evening, accepting compliments on the food as if he'd prepared it himself. "Ellie outdid herself tonight," he'd say with an affectionate smile that never reached his eyes. Vanessa arrived late, making a dramatic entrance in a red dress that drew every eye. She kissed Robert's cheek with lingering familiarity before embracing me. "The place looks amazing, as always," she said, squeezing my arm. "I don't know how you do it all." I smiled, thinking of the offshore account I'd checked that morning. Just years of practice. Throughout the evening, I watched them together. The subtle glances, the inside jokes, the way they gravitated toward each other across the room. It was so obvious that I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. Perhaps I simply hadn't wanted to see it. After the guests left, I cleaned up while Robert and Vanessa lingered over drinks in the living room. Their laughter floated through the house, punctuated by long silences that spoke volumes. When I finished in the kitchen, I found them sitting, close together on the sofa, Vanessa's hand resting on Robert's knee. They sprang apart when I entered, guilt flashing across both faces before they composed themselves. "It's getting late," Vanessa said, standing quickly. "I should head home." "I'll walk you out," Robert offered immediately. I watched from the window as they embraced by her car, their silhouettes merging in the darkness. He stood in the driveway, long after her taillights disappeared, staring into the distance before finally returning inside. "Vanessa's going through a rough time," he explained without being asked. "Her ex is causing problems with the salon expansion." I said non-committally, already climbing the stairs to our bedroom. "I'm sure you'll help her figure it out." The next morning, I rose early and drove to the small cafe where I'd arranged to meet Margaret Wilson. At 78, she remained sharp as ever. Her white hair cut in a stylish bob, her eyes missing nothing as I slid into the seat across from her. "You look terrible, Ellie," she said by way of greeting. "Heart still giving you trouble?" "Not the heart condition the doctor diagnosed," I replied with a small smile. "But yes, heart trouble nonetheless." I laid it all out for her. The affair, the retirement plans I'd known nothing about, the decades of invisibility culminating in this final betrayal. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on the small pad she always carried. "And now?" she asked when I finished. "What do you want to happen?" "I want?" I paused, realizing I'd spent so long accommodating others' wants that I barely recognized my own. "I want to stop disappearing. I want to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Robert Mitchell. And I want to secure what's rightfully mine before he gives it all to Vanessa." Margaret nodded approvingly. "The accounts we set up are bulletproof. He can't touch them, and he won't find them in Standard." Discovery if things get ugly. She tapped her pen against the table. "But there's something else bothering you, isn't there?" I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. I gave up everything for him. My career, my ambitions, my identity. I arranged my entire existence around making his life easier, and he didn't even notice when I went to the emergency room. 40 years, Margaret. 40 years of putting everyone else first. And what do I have to show for it? 3-4 million in offshore accounts for starters, Margaret said dryly, plus the properties and your domestic investments. But I understand what you're asking, and that's not something I can answer for you. She leaned forward. The question isn't what you have to show for the past 40 years, Ellie. It's what you're going to do with however many years you have left. I left our meeting with a clear plan and a lighter heart. For the first time in decades, I was thinking about my own future, rather than facilitating someone else's. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. When I returned home, Robert was in his office on a conference call. I moved silently through the house, gathering the items most precious to me: my grandmother's jewelry, family photographs, the small watercolor my daughter had painted in high school. Nothing valuable enough to be immediately missed, but irreplaceable. To me. I booked a room at the Four Seasons downtown and arranged for a safety deposit box at a bank where Robert had no connections. Then I waited, playing my role perfectly for another week while setting the pieces in motion. The breaking point came, as I knew it would, on the evening of our anniversary. Robert had suggested dinner at Maison Laurent, the French restaurant, downtown where we'd celebrated countless special occasions over the years. I'd spent the day at the spa, getting my hair and nails done, selecting a dress that made me feel beautiful, not just appropriate. I returned home to find Robert and Vanessa in our kitchen again, heads bent close together over a stack of glossy real estate brochures: Florida properties, beachfront condos, retirement communities. "Eleanor!" Robert looked up, surprise and something like guilt flickering across his face. "You're home early." "It's our anniversary," I said simply. "I wanted to look nice for dinner." Vanessa jumped up, smoothing her hands over her designer jeans. "I was just dropping off some information for Robert. He mentioned you two might be interested in looking at vacation properties." The lie was so effortless, delivered with such sincere eyes, that for a moment I almost doubted what I knew. Almost. "How thoughtful," I said, setting my purse down. "Though I'm surprised Robert thinks we need a vacation home. He's hardly used the 2 weeks of vacation time he gets each year." Robert cleared his throat. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I'm thinking about scaling back at the firm. Not full retirement, but maybe 3 days a week instead of 6. "A semi-retirement," Vanessa added helpfully. "So many people are doing it now. Work-life balance and all that." "Interesting," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "And when were you planning to start this new arrangement?" Robert shuffled the brochures together, avoiding my eyes. "We're still working out the details, maybe after the first of the year." "Well," I smiled thinly, "I'm sure you'll figure it out. If you'll excuse me, I need to get ready for dinner." I left them in the kitchen and went upstairs to our bedroom. Through the closed door, I could hear their murmured conversation, the occasional laugh, the comfortable intimacy of longtime lovers. I sat at my vanity, applying makeup with steady hands, and decided that this would be the last time I played the role of Mrs. Robert Mitchell. Dinner was excruciating. Robert ordered champagne, made appropriate toasts to our years together, and presented me with a diamond tennis bracelet across the candlelit table. I accepted it with a grateful smile, thinking of the sapphire earrings hidden in our kitchen. 40 years, Robert mused, raising his glass. Hard to believe, isn't it? Yes, I agreed, meeting his eyes. Especially since you spent the last 5 of them sleeping with my best friend. The champagne sloshed over the rim of his glass as his hand jerked. What are you talking about? Please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. Robert. I found the earrings. I know about the weekend at Martha's Vineyard. I know about Florida. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, calculation, before settling on contrition. Ellie, it's not what you think. Vanessa and I— Spare me, I interrupted, setting down my fork. I don't actually care about the details. What I care about is that you were planning to divorce me after 40 years of marriage without even having the decency to tell me first. Robert's voice dropped to an urgent whisper, eyes darting around the restaurant. Can we please not do this here? We can talk at home. That's just it, Robert. I'm not going home. Not to our home, anyway. His face darkened. What are you talking about? I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. Divorce papers. I've already signed my part. My lawyer will be in touch about the rest. Robert stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. You can't be serious. 40 years of marriage and you're ending it over one indiscretion? One? I laughed softly. Robert, please. This has been going on for years. And it's not about the affair. It's about the fact that I had a cardiac event 4 days ago, and you were too busy planning your new life with Vanessa to even notice. His head snapped up, genuine concern flashing in his eyes for the first time. A heart attack? Why didn't you say anything? I tried, several times. The medical report was on the kitchen island for 3 days. You walked past it every morning. To get your coffee. He fell back against his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 69 years. Ellie, Don't, I said gently. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I'm done being invisible in my own life. And what exactly are you planning to do? His voice had an edge now, the lawyer emerging through the facade of concerned husband. You haven't worked in 40 years. You don't have any income of your own. Have you thought this through at all? I smiled then, a real smile that felt foreign on my face. Oh, Robert, you really should have paid more attention to those tax returns you signed all these years. His expression shifted, calculation replacing concern. The prenup is ironclad, Ellie. You'll get the standard support package, but the bulk of our assets are protected. Our assets, I repeated slowly. Interesting that you still think of them that way, considering you were planning to cut me out completely. That's not the Florida property in Vanessa's name, the new offshore account you opened last month? Did you think I wouldn't find out? Robert's face drained of color. How did you— I know everything, Robert. Every account, every transfer, every lie. I stood, gathering my purse and the untouched bracelet box. Keep the jewelry. Consider it a parting gift for 40 years of service. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool spring evening, leaving my husband of 4 decades sitting alone with his champagne and divorce papers. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the tightness in my chest was gone, replaced by a sensation that took me a moment to identify. Freedom. My driver was waiting at the curb as arranged. Not an Uber this time, but a sleek town car with a discreet driver who opened the door without a word. As we pulled away from the restaurant, I saw Robert emerge onto the sidewalk, scanning the street with a bewildered expression. He looked small suddenly, diminished without me beside him to enhance his stature. The Four Seasons welcomed me with quiet efficiency. My suite overlooked the public garden, the city lights reflecting on the pond where I'd once taken our children to ride the swan boats every spring. I ordered room service, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of wine. My phone began buzzing almost immediately. Robert, then Catherine, then Andrew. I silenced it and watched the city instead, feeling oddly detached from the drama, unfolding in my absence. When I finally checked my messages an hour later, they ranged from Robert's cold fury, "You have no idea what you've done," to Catherine's panic, "Mom, what's going on?" "Dad says you've lost your mind," to Andrew's confusion, "Mom, please call me, I don't understand what's happening." I responded to each of my children with the same brief message, "I'm safe and well, taking some time for myself, we'll call tomorrow." To Robert, I sent nothing at all. The next morning, I met with Jeremy Dawson, the divorce attorney Margaret had recommended. Unlike the young sharks at Robert's firm, Jeremy was 65 with a reputation for handling high-profile splits with discretion and devastating effectiveness. "Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted me in his corner office overlooking the harbor, "I've reviewed your situation. You were smart to move assets early and document everything." "I had good advice," I said, thinking of Margaret. Jeremy nodded. "Your husband has already contacted our office. He's requesting a meeting, attempting to short-circuit formal proceedings." "Of course he is," I said with a small smile. "Robert hates losing control. He's also claiming you're emotionally unstable due to your recent health issues and suggesting temporary guardianship might be appropriate." My smile vanished. "He's what?" "It's a standard intimidation tactic," Jeremy assured me. "Without evidence and with your clear mental acuity, it won't go anywhere. But you should be prepared for him to play dirty." "What about my separate assets, the overseas accounts?" "As long as they're properly documented and taxes have been paid, they're yours. He may try to claim their marital property, but given that they were managed separately throughout your marriage, we have a strong case." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. 40 years together, and it had come to this. Legal strategies and accusations of mental instability. "There's something else you should know," Jeremy said, sliding a folder across his desk. "We had our investigators do some preliminary work. Your husband's relationship with Ms. Pearson appears to go back further than you initially thought. At least 7 years. 7 years. I opened the folder to find credit card statements, hotel receipts, phone records. 7 years of betrayal, meticulously documented while I'd been planning his birthday parties and managing his medication. "I see," I said quietly, closing the folder. "And the Florida property?" "Purchased 6 months ago through a shell company. The deed was transferred to Ms. Pearson last month." Jeremy leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask, how far do you want to take this? Some clients prefer a quick, clean break with favorable terms. Others want every last penny and public vindication." I considered the question carefully. I don't need public drama. I don't even need revenge. What I need is to secure my future and make sure Robert understands exactly one thing. I am not, and never was, as naive as he believed. Jeremy smiled, the kind of smile that had likely terrified opposing counsel for decades. "That, Mrs. Mitchell, I can absolutely deliver." The rest of the day passed in a blur of paperwork and strategy sessions. By evening, I was exhausted but clear-headed. I ordered room service again and finally called my children. Catherine answered on the first ring. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Dad says you've lost your mind and emptied the accounts." "I'm divorcing your father," I said calmly. "After 40 years of marriage, he's been having an affair with Vanessa. They were planning to retire to Florida together once he'd secured his finances away from me." Silence, then a small, disbelieving laugh. "That's ridiculous. Dad and Vanessa? They're friends, that's all." "Catherine, I found the jewelry he bought her. I have documentation of their trips together going back 7 years. Another long silence. But you've always been so happy together. The perfect couple. Everyone says so. What people see isn't always reality, I said gently. Your father and I played our roles well, but the truth is, he stopped seeing me as a person years ago. I became furniture. Comfortable, reliable, and completely invisible. So all this, the divorce, the lawyers, it's punishment for an affair? Mom, people work through these things. I sighed, recognizing Robert's influence in her response. This isn't about punishment. It's about finally valuing myself enough to walk away from someone who doesn't value me at all. But what will you do? Her voice held genuine concern now. Where will you live? How will you support yourself? The question was so telling, so completely reflective of how they all saw me. Helpless, dependent, lost without Robert's guidance and financial support. Catherine, I'm 67 years, old with a Harvard business degree and decades of investment experience. I'll manage just fine. Investment experience? Mom, you've been a housewife since before I was born. Being a housewife was my job, not my identity, I said firmly. There's a lot about me you don't know, simply because you never asked. The conversation with Andrew went much the same way. Disbelief, concern about my welfare, and underlying suspicion that I'd finally cracked under the pressure of being perfect for too long. Mom, maybe you should talk to someone professional before making any big decisions, he suggested carefully. Dad says you've been acting strange ever since your heart thing. I am talking to professionals, I assured him. A cardiologist, a financial advisor, and a very competent divorce attorney. By the time I ended the calls, I was emotionally drained but resolute. My children, like Robert, had created a version of me in their minds that suited their narrative. Devoted mother, flawless hostess, dependable support system. The idea that I might be more complex, with desires and ambitions of my own, had never occurred to them. Well, they were about to learn otherwise. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Robert's attorney, a young shark from his firm, predictably, served counter papers claiming mental incompetence and financial malfeasance. Catherine showed up at the hotel in tears, begging me to come home and talk things through. Andrew left stern voicemails about family responsibility and unnecessary drama. Through it all, I maintained a calm I didn't entirely feel. The tightness in my chest had returned, a persistent reminder of my physical vulnerability. I made an appointment with my cardiologist, doubled down on my medication, and arranged for the hotel's concierge to deliver fresh fruit and herbal tea to my suite. By mid-afternoon, word had spread through our social circle. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from so-called friends, their curiosity thinly veiled as concern. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the next phase of my plan. At exactly 4 o'clock, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Maya Chen, a brilliant young financial tech specialist Margaret had introduced me to months earlier for investment advice. Mrs. Mitchell, I've completed the analysis you requested. The accounts are secure and the transfers have been executed according to your instructions. Thank you, Maya. And the documentation? All digital assets have been backed, up to secure servers. Physical copies are being delivered to your attorney as we speak. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. You've been incredibly helpful. Actually, Maya hesitated. I wanted to ask if you'd consider meeting for coffee sometime. The strategy you've implemented is... Well, it's impressive. I'd love to learn more about your approach. For a moment, I was taken aback. In 40 years of marriage, no one had ever asked about my financial acumen or investment strategy. I'd been relegated to planning dinner parties and coordinating social calendars, my Harvard business degree gathering dust like an abandoned hobby. I'd like that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Perhaps next week, once the immediate situation has stabilized. That evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights come on across Boston, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Eleanor. Vanessa's voice, surprisingly subdued. I think we need to talk. I can't imagine what we'd have to talk about, I replied coolly. Please, not for Robert's sake, but for ours. 40 years of friendship deserves at least one conversation. I almost laughed. Friendship? Is that what you call sleeping with my husband behind my back for 7 years? It wasn't. She stopped, then sighed heavily. It's more complicated than you think. Please just meet me for coffee. 1 hour of your time, and then if you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the strange calm that had settled over me since walking out of Maison Laurent, but I found myself agreeing. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the cafe at the Gardner Museum. A public place with easy exits and plenty of witnesses. Thank you, Vanessa said, genuine relief in her voice. I'll be there. After hanging up, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city below. 40 years of marriage, ending in betrayal and legal maneuvers. 40 years of friendship, corrupted by secrets and lies. Yet somehow, standing alone in a hotel suite I'd paid for with money I'd carefully managed for decades, I felt more like myself than I had in years. The tightness in my chest had eased again, replaced by a curious lightness that felt almost like anticipation. Tomorrow would bring confrontation with Vanessa, more legal wrangling, and undoubtedly more pressure from my children to return to the life I'd abandoned. But for the first time in 40 years, I would face it all as Eleanor Mitchell, not as Robert's wife, not as Catherine and Andrew's mother, not as the perfect hostess or the invisible support system. Just me. Flawed, strong, and finally, irrevocably free. The Gardner Museum Cafe was nearly empty at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner with a clear view of both entrances and the courtyard beyond. I ordered tea and waited, my hands folded calmly atop my handbag. Vanessa swept in at exactly 10, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Her usually perfect blonde bob was hastily styled, her makeup minimal. She wore a simple, gray sweater rather than her typical designer ensemble. Eleanor, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Thank you for coming. I merely nodded, waiting. Let her do the talking. Let her try to justify 7 years of betrayal. I know what you must think of me, she began, her voice low. And you have every right to hate me. I don't hate you. Vanessa, I replied evenly. Hate requires emotional investment. I simply have nothing left to give either of you. She flinched as though I'd slapped her. We never meant for this to happen, Eleanor. You have to believe that. 7 years is a long time for something that just happened, I observed, taking a sip of my tea. But I didn't come here to discuss the affair. I came to understand why my best friend of 40 years would betray me so completely. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't. It wasn't just an affair, Eleanor. Robert and I were in love before you two even met, back in college. But his parents disapproved. My family didn't have the right connections, the right background. When he broke it off, I was devastated. I stared at her, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life story. You dated in college? Robert never mentioned it. Of course he didn't, she said bitterly. Robert Mitchell, golden boy with the perfect pedigree, dating the scholarship girl from South Boston. His father would have cut him off. And you never thought to mention this when I started dating. Him. When I married him. Vanessa looked down at her hands. By then, it was too late. You were so in love with him, and he seemed happy with you. I wanted to be happy for both of you. I really tried, Eleanor. For 33 years, I said flatly. Until you decided to rekindle your college romance behind my back. It wasn't like that, she insisted. After my divorce, when Robert helped me with the legal work for the salons, we started spending time together. It just happened. Things don't just happen, Vanessa. People make choices. I set my cup down carefully. What I can't understand is why the secrecy continued for so long. If you two were so deeply in love, why not tell me? Why the elaborate deception? Vanessa's eyes met mine, guilt mingling with defiance. Because Robert wouldn't leave you. He said he couldn't hurt you that way, couldn't break up the family. So we compromised. You compromised, I repeated, a cold understanding washing over me. He got to keep his respectable marriage and his passionate affair. What exactly was your compromise, Vanessa? She had the grace to look ashamed. I thought eventually he'd be ready. When the kids were grown, when he retired. There was always some future point when we could finally be together openly. And now Florida, I said, connecting the final dots. A clean break, a fresh start, with me conveniently out of the picture. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, she whispered. We were going to tell you together, after the transfer to the Florida property was complete. Robert thought. He thought if your financial future was secure, the transition would be easier. I laughed then, a genuine laugh that startled both of us. My financial future. How thoughtful of him to worry about that after 40 years. Of ignoring my Harvard business degree and financial expertise. Vanessa's eyes widened. Harvard? I thought you went to Wellesley. Bachelor's from Wellesley, MBA from Harvard, class of '81. I was recruited by 3 major investment firms before I left to marry Robert. The expression on her face was almost worth the price of admission. Did you really not know? She shook her head slowly. Robert always talked about you as though I was just a housewife? I finished for her. Yes, that was convenient for him, wasn't it? Keeps everyone in their proper boxes. I'm so sorry, Eleanor, she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. For everything. For the affair. For the lies. I never meant to hurt you. I studied her face, the face of my maid of honor, the godmother to my son, the woman who had held my hand through Robert's mother's funeral and my father's cancer diagnosis. 4 decades of friendship, polluted by lies. What do you want from me, Vanessa? Forgiveness? Understanding? Permission? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe just a chance to explain, to not be the villain in this story. There are no villains, I said quietly. Just people making choices based on what they value most. Robert valued control and convenience. You valued a fantasy that kept you waiting in the wings for 7 years. And I valued a marriage that existed only in my imagination. Vanessa reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. What will you do now? It was the same question everyone had been asking me, as though a woman in her 60s couldn't possibly forge a path without a husband guiding the way. I'm going to St. Lucia, I said, surprising myself with the decision even as I spoke it. I hear it's beautiful this time of year. Her eyebrows shot up. A vacation? Alone? Not a vacation, I corrected her. I own property there, a villa on the north side of the island. I purchased it 5 years ago as an investment. You own? Robert never mentioned. Robert doesn't know, I said simply. There's quite a lot Robert doesn't know about me. I gathered my handbag and stood, leaving enough cash on the table to cover both our drinks. Goodbye, Vanessa. I wish you luck with Florida and Robert. I suspect you'll need it. Eleanor, wait, she called as I walked away. Is there any way we could? I paused, turning back. No, Vanessa, there isn't. Some bridges once burned stay ash. I walked out of the Gardner Museum into the spring sunshine, my steps lighter than they had been in years. Back at the hotel, I found a message from Maya Chen asking if I was available for an early lunch. On impulse, I accepted, redirecting my driver to the small Vietnamese restaurant she'd suggested near the financial district. Maya was already seated when I arrived, a stack of folders and a laptop arranged neatly before her. At 32, she radiated the focused energy that seemed unique to her generation, brilliant, multitasking, unencumbered by the social constraints that had shaped my early career. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, rising to greet me. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice." "Eleanor, please," I insisted, taking the seat across from her. "Mrs. Mitchell feels like someone else's name now." She smiled, a quick flash of perfect teeth. "Eleanor, then. I've been reviewing your portfolio structure based on the strategy we discussed last month, and I have some additional thoughts." For the next hour, Maya walked me through a series of investment scenarios, each more sophisticated than the last. What struck me most wasn't her technical expertise, though that was impressive, but her treatment of me as an equal, a fellow financial mind. No condescension, no simplified explanations, just professional respect I hadn't experienced in decades. "The Singapore account is particularly well-positioned," she noted, pulling up a graph on her laptop. "Your currency hedging strategy was ahead of its time. Most individual investors wouldn't have thought to implement that kind of protection." "I've always been interested in international markets," I said, feeling a spark of my old passion rekindling. "Back at Morgan Stanley, I specialized in emerging Asian economies." Maya's eyebrows rose. "You worked at Morgan Stanley? I had no idea." "Briefly, before I got married," I admitted. "Another lifetime ago." She tilted her head, studying me with newfound curiosity. "You know, we have a consulting division that works with high-net-worth individuals on specialized investment strategies. With your experience and your portfolio, you'd be an ideal candidate for our advisory board." I blinked, caught off guard. "An advisory board? Maya, I haven't worked in finance for 40 years. "But you've been managing your own portfolio all that time," she pointed out. "And quite successfully, I might add. That kind of real-world experience is invaluable." I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest. Not the tight, painful sensation I'd grown accustomed to, but something lighter, something like hope. "I'm going to St. Lucia for a while," I told her, "to clear my head and think about what comes next. But when I return, I'd be interested in discussing this further." Maya's smile widened. "Excellent. And while you're there, would you consider allowing me to set up remote access to your accounts? Just for monitoring purposes, of course. Given the current market volatility, it might be prudent." We spent another half-hour discussing technical details, and for the first time in memory, I felt fully engaged intellectually, my mind stretching to embrace concepts and strategies I hadn't considered in years. When we parted, it was with a promise to reconnect in a month. Back at the hotel, I found a series of increasingly frantic messages from Robert and my children. The latest, from Catherine, warned that Robert was beside himself and threatening to have me declared incompetent if I didn't return home immediately. I silenced my phone and contacted the hotel's concierge service to arrange my travel to St. Lucia. Within hours, everything was set. A first-class ticket departing the following evening, a private car to meet me at the airport, and arrangements for the villa to be opened and stocked before my arrival. That night, I sat by the window of my suite, watching the city lights and reflecting on the strange turn my life had taken. 1 week ago, I had been Mrs. Robert Mitchell, corporate wife extraordinaire, planning a dinner party and worrying about my husband's cholesterol levels. Now I was Eleanor Fairchild again. I had decided to reclaim my maiden name, a woman with millions in offshore accounts, a villa in the Caribbean, and possibly a consulting position with a financial tech firm. The tightness in my chest had eased considerably. Maybe it had never been a cardiac condition at all. but simply the weight of a life lived for everyone but myself. The following morning, I met with Jeremy Dawson once more to finalize my legal strategy before departing. Robert's team is pushing hard for a quick resolution, Jeremy informed me. They're offering a surprisingly generous settlement, including the house in Oakridge and a substantial alimony package. I nodded, unsurprised. He's worried about what might come out in discovery. His affair with Vanessa, the Florida property, his plans to retire without telling me. He'd rather pay me off than risk damage to his reputation. That's my assessment as well, Jeremy agreed. The question is, do you want to accept the offer or push for more? I considered the question carefully. What I want is very simple. My fair share of our marital assets, ownership of my grandmother's properties transferred solely to my name, and a clear acknowledgement that my offshore accounts remain my separate property. That's entirely reasonable, Jeremy said, making notes. Though I should warn you, Robert's team is likely to fight hardest on those offshore accounts. Even with documentation showing they were funded with your separate property, they'll argue that your work as a homemaker was what allowed him to build his career and earnings, which in turn provided the funds for those investments. I smiled, thinly. A fascinating argument, considering he spent 40 years treating my homemaking as worthless and invisible. But let them try. Every document is in order. Every tax return filed correctly. I've played by the rules, even if Robert hasn't. By afternoon, I had completed my preparations. My most important documents were secured in the hotel safe. Copies had been sent to Jeremy and to a secure digital vault Maya had helped me establish, and my suitcases were packed for an extended stay abroad. I was just reviewing my itinerary when a commotion erupted in the hallway outside my suite. Robert's voice, raised in anger, followed by the calm, professional tones of hotel security. I opened the door to find my husband of 40 years red-faced and disheveled, attempting to bully his way past two suited men. "Eleanor," he thundered when he saw me. "This has gone on long enough. You're coming home right now." I stepped back, allowing the security personnel to remain between us. "Robert, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. My attorney has been in contact with yours. There's nothing more to say." "Nothing more to say?" he sputtered, incredulous. "You walk out on 40 years of marriage, you freeze our accounts. You file for divorce without so much as a conversation, and you think there's nothing more to say?" "Sir," one of the security guards interjected, "if you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have no choice but to escort you from the premises." Robert straightened, his lawyer persona sliding into place. "I need 5 minutes with my wife. In private." "That's not going to happen," I said calmly. "Whatever you have to say can be communicated through our attorneys." "For God's sake, Eleanor." His composure cracked again. "You had a heart attack. You're not thinking clearly. You need to come home where I can take care of you." It wasn't a heart attack, Robert. It was a cardiac event caused by stress, and the primary source of that stress is currently standing in this hallway. His expression darkened. "Is that what this is about? You're punishing me for not babying you through a minor health scare? That's petty, even for you." I felt a strange calm settle over me, watching this man I had loved for so long reveal his true nature. "No, Robert. This is about me finally recognizing my own worth after decades of being treated like furniture. Comfortable, reliable, and completely invisible." "That's absurd," he scoffed. "I've given you everything. The house, the cars, the country club membership. What more could you possibly want?" "To be seen," I said simply. "To be valued as a person, not an accessory. To have my Harvard MBA acknowledged at least once in 40 years of marriage." He blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Your what?" "Exactly," I nodded. "Goodbye, Robert. Safe travels back to Oakridge." I started to close the door, but he lunged forward, causing the security guards to restrain him. This isn't over, Eleanor. You think you can just walk away? You've got nothing without me. Nothing. I closed the door on his shouting, leaned against it, and took a deep, cleansing breath. The man I had devoted my life to believed I had nothing without him, even as millions of dollars sat securely in accounts he'd never know about. It was, perhaps, the perfect summation of our 40-year marriage. My flight to St. Lucia departed without incident the following evening. As the lights of Boston receded beneath the clouds, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in decades, I was traveling alone, answerable to no one, with no social obligations or family responsibilities weighing me down. The villa exceeded my expectations. Perched on a hillside overlooking the Caribbean, it offered panoramic views of the ocean and the lush tropical landscape. The property manager, a dignified local woman named Josephine, greeted me with professional courtesy and a comprehensive overview of the estate I'd purchased but never visited. The previous owners used it primarily as a vacation home, she explained as we toured the airy open rooms. But it's fully equipped for year-round living if that's your preference. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. For now, let's say I'm taking an extended sabbatical. Josephine nodded, unperturbed. Very good, Mrs. Mitchell. I've arranged for a housekeeper to come 3 times a week, and a chef is available on request for special occasions. The grounds staff maintains the property daily, though they're quite unobtrusive. Please call me Eleanor, I said. Mrs. Mitchell is no longer accurate. She assessed me with intelligent eyes, nodding once more. As you wish, Eleanor. Is there anything else you require this evening? Just privacy, I said with a smile. And perhaps a recommendation for a good book about local history. I'd like to learn more about my new home. The next few days passed in a haze of peaceful solitude. I swam in the infinity pool overlooking the ocean, read the books Josephine had thoughtfully provided, and slept deeply for the first time in years. My phone remained off, my laptop closed. The outside world, with its legal battles and family drama, seemed impossibly distant. On my 4th morning in St. Lucia, I woke early and decided to explore the nearby town. Josephine had mentioned a local market that offered fresh produce and seafood, as well as crafts from island artisans. I dressed simply in linen pants and a loose blouse, slipped on comfortable sandals, and set out with nothing but a small handbag and a sense of adventure. The market was a riot of color and sound, bustling with locals and the occasional tourist. I wandered through stalls selling vibrant fruits I couldn't name, hand-woven baskets, and intricately carved wooden figurines. The vendors called out greetings, their lilting accents a musical counterpoint to the general hum of commerce. I had just purchased a small watercolor from an elderly artist when a familiar voice cut through the market noise. Eleanor Fairchild? Is that really you? I turned to find a tall, silver-haired man regarding me with delighted surprise. It took me a moment to place him. Thomas Harrington, an investment banker I'd known at Morgan Stanley all those years ago. Thomas, I said, extending my hand in greeting. What an unexpected pleasure. He clasped my hand warmly. It's been, 35 years? Last I heard, you were marrying some hotshot lawyer from Boston and leaving the financial world behind. 40 years, I corrected him. And yes, that's exactly what happened. But circumstances change. Thomas studied me with interest. They certainly do. Are you here on vacation? Something like that, I hedged. I own property on the island. It seemed like a good time to finally enjoy it. Remarkable coincidence, he said, gesturing to a cafe at the edge of the market. I retired here 5 years ago. Have time for coffee? I'd love to catch up properly. Something in his easy manner, free of the complications that had defined my recent interactions, made me nod. Coffee would be lovely. Over the next hour, Thomas and I exchanged life stories. He'd had a successful career at several major financial institutions, married twice, raised 3 children, and finally settled in St. Lucia to pursue his passion for sailing and marine conservation. When I explained my current situation, the divorce, the rediscovery of my financial acumen, the uncertain future, he listened without judgment. "You know," he said thoughtfully when I'd finished, "I sit on the board of a microfinance initiative here that helps local women start businesses. We're always looking for advisors with solid financial backgrounds. It's volunteer work, but deeply rewarding." "Microfinance?" I echoed, intrigued despite myself. "I've read about the model, but haven't had direct experience." Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "It's transformative, especially for women in developing economies. The return rates are impressive, and the social impact is immeasurable. With your Harvard background and investment experience, you'd be an incredible asset." For the second time in as many weeks, someone was valuing my professional capabilities I'd buried beneath 4 decades of dinner parties and charity galas. "I'd like to learn more," I said cautiously. "Though I should warn you, I'm in the middle of a rather complicated divorce. My availability might be unpredictable." Thomas waved away my concern. "The board meets monthly, but much of the work can be done remotely. Why don't you come to our next meeting as my guest? No commitment, just an opportunity to see if it interests you." I agreed, surprised by my own eagerness to engage with the financial world again, even in this small way. We exchanged contact, information, and parted with promises to reconnect soon. Walking back to the villa, I felt a strange buoyancy. For 40 years, my identity had been Mrs. Robert Mitchell, corporate wife and social coordinator. Now, in the space of a few weeks, I had the beginnings of a new life taking shape: financial consultant, potential board member, independent woman of means. The tightness in my chest had disappeared entirely. That evening, I finally turned on my phone, bracing myself for the deluge of messages that would surely have accumulated. To my surprise, there were only a handful: a brief update from Jeremy, a check-in from Maya about my accounts, and a single text from Catherine. "I hope you're okay, Mom. Call when you're ready." No frantic voicemails from Robert. No angry demands to return home immediately. No family emergency requiring my immediate attention. Curious, I called Jeremy first. "Eleanor," he greeted me warmly. "How's St. Lucia?" "Peaceful," I replied. "What's happening with Robert?" I expected more resistance to my departure. Jeremy chuckled. "Ah, yes. Well, it seems Robert had a rather illuminating conversation with his legal team after his scene at the hotel. They explained in no uncertain terms that his behavior could be construed as harassment, potentially triggering a restraining order, which would not look favorable to the court. And when they reviewed the financial documentation you provided, they realized your separate property claims were airtight. Robert's been remarkably cooperative since then." I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. 40 years together, and Robert's concern for me had evaporated the moment he realized he couldn't control me or my assets. "What's the timeline? Now?" I asked. "We're looking at a mediated settlement within the next month," Jeremy said. "Robert's team has dropped the competency angle entirely and seems eager to resolve this quietly and quickly. I can handle most of it with limited input from you, if you'd prefer to extend your stay abroad." "I would, thank you," I said, feeling another weight lift from my shoulders. "Keep me updated on any major developments." Next, I called Maya to check on my financial arrangements. She assured me that everything was proceeding smoothly, the markets were stable, and my accounts were secure. She also mentioned that her firm's advisory board had expressed formal interest in my potential involvement. "No pressure," she added quickly. "But when you return, they'd like to meet with you to discuss the possibility further." Finally, I texted Catherine rather than calling, keeping it brief but warm. "I'm well and safe, taking time for myself. We'll be in touch soon. Love you." Within minutes, her reply appeared. "Love you too, Mom. Dad's not handling this well, but that's not..." Your problem anymore. Take care of yourself. I stared at her message, tears prickling behind my eyes. Of all the reactions I might have expected from my children, understanding and support hadn't been on the list. Perhaps I'd underestimated them, just as Robert had underestimated me. The next few weeks passed in a gentle rhythm of discovery and renewal. I attended the microfinance board meeting with Thomas and found myself deeply engaged with both the financial and social aspects of the program. The board members, a mix of local business leaders and international experts, welcomed my insights and experience, treating me with the professional respect I'd been starved for. I explored the island, venturing beyond tourist areas to discover hidden beaches and mountain trails. I began swimming daily, my body growing stronger and more energetic with each passing week. I read voraciously, catching up on financial journals and literature alike, feeding my mind after years of intellectual starvation. And slowly, carefully, I began to reimagine my future, not as an extension of Robert's life, nor as a support system for my adult children, but as a wholly independent entity with its own purpose and direction. 1 month into my stay, Josephine approached me as I sat on the terrace, reviewing reports Thomas had shared from the microfinance initiative. "Eleanor," she said, her usual formality softened by weeks of daily interaction, "forgive the intrusion, but there's a young woman at the gate asking for you. She says her name is Maya Chen." I looked up in surprise. "Maya? From Boston? Did she say why she's here?" "Only that she has important information that couldn't be conveyed electronically," Josephine replied. "She seems quite earnest. Shall I send her away?" "No," I said, curiosity winning out over caution. "Please show her up to the terrace." Minutes later, Maya appeared, looking uncharacteristically rumpled after what must have been a long flight. She carried a sleek leather portfolio and wore an expression of controlled urgency. "Eleanor," she said, forgoing pleasantries, "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we've uncovered something concerning about your husband's financial activities." I gestured for her to sit, my peaceful mood dissipating. "What's happened?" Maya opened her portfolio, extracting a series of documents. "Our security team detected unusual attempts to access your private accounts. Sophisticated probes that triggered our monitoring system. When we traced the source, it led back to a cybersecurity firm retained by your husband's law practice." Cold anger replaced my initial alarm. "He's trying to hack my accounts?" "Not directly," Maya clarified. "He's hired professionals to do it. They're good, but our protections are better. None of your assets have been compromised." "But why?" I wondered aloud. Jeremy said Robert's legal team acknowledged my separate property claims were valid. Maya spread additional documents across the table. "That was before they became aware of the full extent of your holdings. It seems your husband recently discovered your Caribbean property through a casual comment from a mutual acquaintance. That led him to suspect there might be other assets he wasn't aware of." I thought back to my encounter with Thomas in the tea market. Had he mentioned meeting me to someone connected to Robert? The investment world was small, after all, particularly among those of our generation. "So now what?" I asked, my hard-won serenity evaporating. "Do I need to return to Boston?" Maya shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. That's exactly what he wants. To regain the upper hand by forcing you back into his territory. We've already strengthened the security protocols on all your accounts, and I've brought new documentation for you to sign that will further protect your assets." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Our investigation revealed that your husband has been systematically transferring marital assets to shell companies for the past 18 months, far longer than you initially suspected. The Florida property is just the tip of the iceberg." The revelation should have hurt, but instead I felt only a grim satisfaction. Robert's betrayal had been even more calculated than I'd imagined, confirming that my decision to leave had been not just justified, but long overdue. "What do you recommend?" I asked, my business instincts reasserting themselves. Maya's expression turned determined. We fight back. Not emotionally, not publicly, but financially. We document every transfer, every shell company, every hidden asset. We build a case so overwhelming that his legal team has no choice but to advise a generous settlement. And in the meantime? In the meantime, she said, her voice softening slightly, you continue rebuilding your life on your terms. You've already started, Eleanor. Don't let him derail you now. I looked out over the Caribbean, its waters a brilliant turquoise under the afternoon sun. The peace I'd found here was real, as was the sense of possibility that had been growing within me. Robert might still be trying to control me from thousands of miles away, but he no longer defined my reality. You're right, I said, turning back to Maya with renewed resolve. Let's prepare for battle, but on our terms, not his. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing documents and strategizing. By evening, I had signed new authorization forms, established additional security measures, and initiated a comprehensive audit of all marital assets that would run parallel to the official discovery process. After Maya departed for her hotel, promising to return in the morning with further updates, I sat alone on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The initial shock of her revelations had faded, replaced by a steely determination I barely recognized in myself. For 40 years, I had been the perfect corporate wife, gracious, supportive, invisible. I had surrendered my ambitions, my identity, my very self to the role Robert had assigned me. And all the while, he had been planning his escape, methodically separating assets and constructing an exit strategy that would leave me with just enough to maintain appearances, but not enough for true independence. He had underestimated me spectacularly. As darkness fell over the island, I made a decision. I would not be returning to Boston anytime soon, not even for the divorce proceedings. Jeremy could represent my interests fully, with Maya's firm providing financial expertise as needed. The life I was building here, consulting with the microfinance initiative, exploring new investment opportunities, rediscovering my own capabilities, was too precious to abandon for a courtroom drama orchestrated by Robert. He wanted me back on his territory, playing by his rules. Instead, I would remain exactly where I was, living well on my own terms, perhaps the most effective revenge of all. The night air was warm and fragrant with tropical flowers as I sipped a glass of wine, contemplating this unexpected new chapter of my life. I had come to St. Lucia seeking refuge, a temporary escape from the chaos of my imploding marriage. What I had found instead was the beginning of a journey back to myself. Not the naive young MBA from Harvard, nor the perfectionist corporate wife, but someone new, someone stronger, someone finally, irrevocably free. 6 months. That's how long I had been in St. Lucia when the legal war truly began. The peaceful rhythm I'd established, morning swims, afternoons consulting with the microfinance initiative, evenings reading on my terrace, was interrupted by an urgent call from Jeremy. "Robert's gone nuclear," he said without preamble. "His team has filed motions challenging nearly every aspect of our settlement proposal, including your right to remain abroad during proceedings." I sighed, watching a sailboat glide across the horizon. On what grounds? Primarily that you're avoiding proper discovery of assets. They're claiming your extended absence suggests an attempt to hide marital property. Jeremy's voice took on the precise, measured tone he used when delivering particularly unpleasant news. They've also subpoenaed records from your grandmother's properties, alleging that Robert contributed significantly to their maintenance over the years. "That's absurd," I replied, feeling the familiar tightness return to my chest. "Robert never spent a dime on those properties. He thought they were a waste of money." "I know, Eleanor. We have the documentation to prove it. But his strategy is clear: delay, obstruct, and hope you'll eventually tire of fighting and accept less than you deserve. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply as my cardiologist had taught me. He wants me to come crawling back to Boston. Exactly. And there's something else. His team has requested your medical records, specifically related to your cardiac event. They're floating the idea that your decision-making may have been impaired by health issues. The sheer audacity of... It almost made me laugh. Robert, who hadn't even noticed my hospital visit, who had dismissed my attempts to discuss my diagnosis, now claiming concern for my health as a legal tactic. Fight it, I said firmly. All of it. I'm not returning to Boston until I choose to, and I'm certainly not accepting less than my fair share of our marital assets. I expected as much, Jeremy said, a note of approval in his voice. We'll need to schedule some video depositions, and you'll need to sign additional affidavits. I can send a notary to you. Whatever it takes, I replied. Robert spent 40 years underestimating me. He's about to discover that was a mistake. After hanging up, I paced the terrace, trying to calm my racing heart. The peacefulness of the past months had lulled me into believing that perhaps the divorce could proceed without ugly confrontation. I should have known better. Robert Mitchell, Escoretzi, had built his career on aggressive litigation strategy. Of course, he would deploy the same tactics against me. My phone rang again, Catherine this time. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided against it. My children deserved better than avoidance. Mom? Her voice was tight with stress. Have you talked to your lawyer today? Just now, I confirmed. I take it you've heard about your father's latest maneuvers. He's lost his mind, she said, flatly. He showed up at my house last night, ranting about offshore accounts and hidden assets. He kept saying you've been plotting this for years, that you manipulated him into signing tax returns without reading them. And what do you think? I asked carefully. Catherine was silent for a long moment. I think I never knew either of you. Not really. She sighed heavily. Dad's been drinking a lot, Mom, and Vanessa's practically moved into the house, though they're not even pretending to be subtle anymore. It's like he's having some kind of late-life crisis. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, I said, meaning it. Whatever had transpired between Robert and me, our children hadn't asked to be collateral damage in our war. That's just it, Mom. I don't think I am in the middle anymore. Her voice softened. I always thought you and Dad were this perfect team, the power couple everyone envied. But now I'm seeing things differently. The way he talks about you, like, you were just furniture, an accessory to his life. It's making me question everything I thought I knew about your marriage. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Catherine, no, let me finish. I need to say this. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about all the times I dropped the kids off without notice, expecting you to rearrange your life around my schedule. All the dinner parties you hosted for Dad's firm that I took for granted. All the birthdays and anniversaries you remembered when everyone else forgot. That's what mothers do, I said automatically. No, Mom, that's what you did. That's what we all expected you to do, without ever asking if it was what you wanted. There was a rustle of papers on her end. I found your Harvard diploma last week. Dad asked me to look for some documents in the attic, and there it was, tucked away in an old portfolio. Why didn't you ever tell us? Why didn't you hang it in your office alongside Dad's? The question hit me like a physical blow. Why hadn't I? What had possessed me to hide my achievements, to diminish myself year after year? It didn't seem important, I said finally. My career wasn't the one that mattered in our household. And that's exactly the problem, Catherine said, new firmness in her voice. I've spent my whole life thinking that's how marriage works. One person shines while the other one serves. But that's not a marriage. That's servitude. It wasn't quite that simple, I protested, though part of me recognized the truth in her words. Maybe not. But I'm starting to understand why you left, Mom, and why you're not coming back. She paused. Andrew and I want you to know that whatever happens with the divorce, we support you. Dad can fight his own battles. Tears stung my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. After months of emotional numbness, this sudden surge of feeling caught me off guard. Thank you, I managed to say. Just promise me one thing, Catherine continued. When this is all over, come visit us. The kids miss their grandmother and I'd like to get to know the woman behind the perfect mother facade, the Harvard MBA who's apparently been a financial genius all these years. I laughed despite myself. I wouldn't go that far. Dad's lawyer would. He called you a financial mastermind who orchestrated a decades-long deception. Dad was furious, but I thought it sounded pretty badass. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up, and I sat watching the sunset with a lighter heart than I'd expected given Jeremy's news. My children, at least, were beginning to see beyond the roles Robert and I had played for so many years. The next morning brought an email from Maya with updated security protocols for my accounts and a warning that Robert's team was likely to escalate their information-gathering efforts. Be careful about any contact from unfamiliar sources, she cautioned. And consider changing your regular routines for the time being. Thomas called later that day, his normally jovial tone replaced by concern. Eleanor, I feel I should warn you. A man claiming to be a potential investor in our microfinance initiative has been asking questions about you, pointed questions about your financial involvement and your history. My stomach clenched. Did he give a name? Martin Reynolds, supposedly from a Boston investment firm. But when I had our administrator check, no such person exists at the company he claimed to represent. Robert? I said grimly. My husband is having me investigated. Thomas's silence spoke volumes. I didn't give him any information, he assured me finally. And I've alerted the board to be careful about any similar inquiries. But, Eleanor, if this escalates— It won't, I said firmly. Robert is used to intimidating opponents into submission. But I'm not his opponent. I'm his wife of 40 years, and I know exactly how his mind works. After ending the call, I contacted Jeremy with this new information. His response was swift and decisive. We would file for a restraining order prohibiting Robert or his representatives from contacting my associates or attempting to interfere with my professional activities. It won't stop him completely, Jeremy warned, but it will establish a clear record of harassment that will work against him in court. The next few weeks brought a flurry of legal activity, depositions taken via video conference, affidavits, signed and notarized, financial records submitted and challenged. Through it all, I maintained my new life in St. Lucia, refusing to be drawn back into Robert's orbit no matter how hard he pulled. My involvement with the microfinance initiative deepened, moving from advisory capacity to active participation in funding decisions. I found myself genuinely engaged with the work, using skills I'd kept dormant for decades to help local women establish businesses that could support their families. Thomas became a regular presence in my life, first as a colleague, then as a friend, and eventually as something more. Our dinner meetings to discuss microfinance projects gradually evolved into conversations about books, music, travel, all the aspects of life that had been subordinated to Robert's needs and preferences for so long. You're different than you were when you first arrived, Thomas observed one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my terrace. More vibrant, more present. I feel different, I admitted. For 40 years, I lived in a kind of fog, going through the motions of a life I thought I was supposed to want. Now I wake up each morning and actively choose what my day will look like. Thomas reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I like the woman you're choosing to be. I turned my hand to clasp his, a simple gesture that felt monumental, after months of solitude. So do I. Our relationship progressed cautiously, both of us carrying the weight of past marriages and the wisdom of age. There was none of the desperate passion that had characterized my early days with Robert, but something steadier, more equal, a partnership rather than a performance. It was during this period of relative calm that Robert launched his most aggressive attack yet. I was reviewing funding proposals for the microfinance initiative when my phone rang. Maya, her voice tight with controlled fury. Eleanor, Robert's team has filed a motion alleging criminal financial misconduct. They're claiming, you deliberately misrepresented marital assets on joint tax returns, potentially exposing Robert to legal liability. The room seemed to tilt slightly, my vision narrowing. That's absurd. Every return was filed properly and Robert signed them all. He's claiming he signed without reading because he trusted you, Maya replied. And that you exploited that trust to establish your separate accounts without his knowledge. Which is perfectly legal, I pointed out, struggling to keep my voice steady. There's no requirement that spouses disclose every financial decision to each other. Under normal circumstances, no. But they're painting a picture of systematic deception spanning decades, potentially rising to the level of fraud. Maya hesitated. Eleanor, this changes things. Jeremy thinks you need to return to Boston to address these allegations directly. No. The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. I won't be manipulated into returning on Robert's terms. This isn't just about the divorce anymore, Maya said gently. Criminal allegations, even baseless ones, require a direct response. We need to shut this down before it gains any traction. I closed my eyes, feeling the trap closing around me. Robert knew exactly what he was doing. He couldn't force me to accept a lesser settlement, couldn't intimidate me with legal maneuvering, couldn't even turn my children against me. So he'd escalated to the one threat that might bring me back to Boston: potential criminal charges. I need to think, I said finally. Let me talk to Jeremy directly. Jeremy confirmed Maya's assessment. While the allegations were likely without merit, they couldn't be ignored or addressed remotely. I would need to appear in person to refute them effectively. How soon? I asked, resignation settling over me like a heavy cloak. The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday, Jeremy replied. I've already arranged for a forensic accountant to review all the returns in question. But Eleanor, you need to prepare yourself. This will be ugly. It already is, I said quietly. Robert's determined to punish me for leaving, even if it means destroying both our reputations in the process. After hanging up, I walked down to the beach below my villa, letting the rhythmic crash of waves calm my racing thoughts. For 6 months, I'd been rebuilding myself piece by piece, recovering the woman who had existed before becoming Mrs. Robert Mitchell. Now I would have to face him directly, on his chosen battlefield, surrounded by the life I'd fled. The thought made my chest tighten painfully, the first recurrence of cardiac symptoms in months. I pressed my hand to my sternum, focusing on slow, deep breaths as the pain gradually subsided. I would not allow Robert to undo all the healing I'd accomplished. I would not return to Boston as the trembling, invisible wife he remembered. If he wanted a confrontation, he would face Eleanor Fairchild, Harvard MBA and financial strategist, a woman who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. You're different than you were when you first arrived, Thomas observed one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my terrace. More vibrant, more present. I feel different, I admitted. For 40 years, I lived in a kind of fog, going through the motions of a life I thought I was supposed to want. Now I wake up each morning and actively choose what my day will look like. Thomas reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I like the woman you're choosing to be. I turned my hand to clasp his, a simple gesture that felt monumental after months of solitude. So do I. Our relationship progressed cautiously, both of us carrying the weight of past marriages and the wisdom of age. There was none of the desperate passion that had characterized my early days with Robert, but something steadier, more equal, a partnership rather than a performance. It was during this period of relative calm that Robert launched his most aggressive attack yet. I was reviewing funding proposals for the microfinance initiative when my phone rang. Maya, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Eleanor, Robert's team has filed a motion alleging criminal financial misconduct. They're claiming you deliberately misrepresented marital assets on joint tax returns, potentially exposing Robert to legal liability." The room seemed to tilt slightly, my vision narrowing. That's absurd. Every return was filed properly, and Robert signed them all. "He's claiming he signed without reading because he trusted you," Maya replied, "and that you exploited that trust to establish your separate accounts without his knowledge." "Which is perfectly legal," I pointed out, struggling to keep my voice steady. "There's no requirement that spouses disclose every financial decision to each other." "Under normal circumstances, no. But they're painting a picture of systematic deception spanning decades, potentially rising to the level of fraud." Maya hesitated. "Eleanor, this changes things. Jeremy thinks you need to return to Boston to address these allegations directly." "No." The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. "I won't be manipulated into returning on Robert's terms." "This isn't just about the divorce anymore," Maya said gently. "Criminal allegations, even baseless ones, require a direct response. We need to shut this down before it gains any traction." I closed my eyes, feeling the trap closing around me. Robert knew exactly what he was doing. He couldn't force me to accept a lesser settlement, couldn't intimidate me with legal maneuvering, couldn't even turn my children against me. So he'd escalated to the one threat that might bring me back. To Boston. Potential criminal charges. "I need to think," I said finally. "Let me talk to Jeremy directly." Jeremy confirmed Maya's assessment. While the allegations were likely without merit, they couldn't be ignored or addressed remotely. I would need to appear in person to refute them effectively. "How soon?" I asked, resignation settling over me like a heavy cloak. "The hearing is scheduled for next Thursday," Jeremy replied. "I've already arranged for a forensic accountant to review all the returns in question. But Eleanor, you need to prepare yourself. This will be ugly." "It already is," I said quietly. "Robert's determined to punish me for leaving, even if it means destroying both our reputations in the process." After hanging up, I walked down to the beach below my villa, letting the rhythmic crash of waves calm my racing thoughts. For 6 months, I'd been rebuilding myself piece by piece, recovering. The Thomas was heartbroken when I told him of my impending departure, but unsurprised. "He was bound to escalate eventually," he observed grimly. "Men like Robert can't stand losing control." "It's only temporary," I assured him, hoping it was true. "Once these allegations are dismissed, I'll return to St. Lucia and my work here." "And us?" Thomas asked quietly. "Where do we stand in all this?" I took his hand, feeling the strange mix of vulnerability and strength that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. "I care for you deeply, Thomas, more than I expected to care for anyone again. But I need to resolve my past before I can fully embrace a future with you or anyone else." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be here when you return. Just promise me you won't let him pull you back into that fog you described." "Never again," I vowed. I spent my last days in St. Lucia preparing with Maya and Jeremy via video conference, reviewing every tax return filed during my marriage, tracking the source of funds for each investment, and documenting every financial decision I'd made over 40 years. The pattern that emerged was crystal clear. I had managed my separate property meticulously, paid appropriate taxes on all earnings, and made investment decisions that were both legal and prudent. Robert's allegations of fraud were demonstrably false. But the damage to my reputation, to my newfound peace, had already been done. Catherine met me at Logan Airport, her face a study in conflicted emotions. "You look amazing, Mom," she said, embracing me tightly. "St. Lucia clearly agrees with you." "It does," I agreed, studying her in return. She looked tired, with new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "How are the children?" "Confused," she admitted as we walked to her car. "Dad's been telling them you abandoned the family, that you've been hiding money that should have been supporting them. It's gotten ugly, Mom." "I'm sorry they've been dragged into this," I said, guilt twisting in my stomach. "They shouldn't have to choose sides." "That's exactly what Andrew and I told Dad," Catherine said firmly. "We've limited his access to the kids until he stops using them as emotional pawns. It's not fair to anyone, least of all Ethan and Emma." I glanced at her in surprise. The Catherine I'd left behind would never have stood up to Robert so directly. That must have gone over well. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "About as well as you'd expect? He accused me of betraying him, said I was choosing you over family loyalty. That's when I realized how alike you and I actually are, Mom." "How so?" "We both spent decades making ourselves smaller to accommodate Robert Mitchell's ego. The difference is, you finally decided to stop. And now, so have I." The realization that my departure had sparked changes beyond my own transformation was both comforting and sobering. I had never intended to upend my family's dynamics so completely, but perhaps it had been inevitable. Systems built on inequality and invisibility were inherently unstable. Catherine had arranged for me to stay in one of my grandmother's properties, in Brookline, the very ones Robert had dismissed as more trouble than they're worth. The irony wasn't lost on me as I settled into the comfortable brownstone, its solid walls and polished woodwork a testament to generations of Fairchild women who had maintained their independence despite societal expectations. The legal team arrived the next morning, Jeremy, Maya, and a forensic accountant named David Levinson, whose reputation for dismantling financial fraud allegations was unparalleled. We spent hours reviewing documents, preparing statements, and strategizing responses to the various scenarios Robert's team might present. "The facts are on our side," David assured me, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "Every transaction was properly documented, every tax return accurately filed. If anything, you've been excessively meticulous." "Robert always handled the legal aspects of our lives," I explained. "I knew I needed to be beyond reproach in my financial dealings." "That foresight will serve you well now," Jeremy said, closing a folder of documents. "But Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss. Our investigation into Robert's finances has uncovered some concerning patterns." Maya took over, her expression grave. "We believe Robert may have been underreporting his own income for years, particularly earnings from investments he managed through offshore entities. There's a pattern of discrepancies that suggests deliberate tax avoidance." The irony was almost too perfect. "He's been hiding assets while accusing me of the same." "Precisely," Jeremy nodded. "The question is, do we introduce this information at tomorrow's hearing? It would certainly undercut his allegations against you, but it could also trigger a broader investigation that might have serious consequences for Robert." I considered the implications carefully. Robert had attacked my integrity, threatened my freedom, and disrupted the peace I'd worked so hard to achieve. I had every right to retaliate with the evidence Maya had uncovered. But such a move would devastate my children, potentially expose Robert to criminal charges, and undoubtedly prolong an already bitter divorce battle. Was revenge worth the collateral damage? "Let's hold this in reserve," I decided finally. "If Robert pursues these false allegations after we've presented our evidence, then we'll consider introducing what you've found. But I'd prefer to resolve this as cleanly as possible. Jeremy and Maya exchanged glances, clearly surprised by my restraint. Are you sure? Jeremy asked. This could give us significant leverage in settlement negotiations. I'm not interested in destroying Robert, I said firmly. I just want what's rightfully mine and the freedom to live the rest of my life on my terms. That evening, as I sat in my grandmother's study reviewing documents one last time, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Eleanor. Robert's voice tight with controlled fury. I understand you're back in Boston. For the hearing, yes, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. My lawyer advised against discussing this directly, Robert. To hell with the lawyers, he snapped. This has gone far enough. Do you have any idea what you've done? To this family? To our children? To our reputation in this community? Our reputation, I repeated slowly. You mean the carefully constructed facade that allowed you to have your cake and eat it too for 40 years? That reputation? Don't be dramatic, he scoffed. We had a good marriage, a stable home, financial security, and you threw it all away because of one indiscretion. An indiscretion that lasted 7 years, I corrected him, with my best friend. While you were planning to leave me without so much as a conversation, there was a long silence, then a heavy sigh. Look, Eleanor, we're both too old for this kind of drama. These criminal allegations, they were a mistake. My lawyer got overzealous. If you'll agree to a reasonable settlement— Define reasonable, I interrupted, suddenly tired of the games. You keep your grandmother's properties and a fair portion of our liquid assets. I retain the house in Oakridge and my retirement accounts. We both walk away with our dignity intact. And my offshore accounts? The investments I've managed separately. For decades? Another silence, longer this time. Those should be considered marital property. I am your husband, after all. Were, I corrected. You were my husband, the man who didn't notice when I had a cardiac event, the man who planned to abandon me for my best friend, the man who is now attempting to intimidate me with false criminal allegations. Eleanor! No, Robert. You've had 40 years to speak. Now it's my turn. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Tomorrow I will present evidence refuting every allegation you've made against me. I will demonstrate to the court that my financial dealings have been transparent and lawful throughout our marriage. And then, I will return to St. Lucia to continue building the life you never bothered to ask if I wanted. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. You'll never survive the scrutiny of a full investigation. Perhaps not, I conceded, but neither will you. I ended the call before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly, but my resolve firmer than ever. 40 years of accommodating. Robert's needs and desires of making myself smaller to make him feel bigger had culminated in this moment of absolute clarity. I owed him nothing. The hearing room was packed the following morning. Robert's colleagues from the firm, mutual friends curious about the implosion of our supposedly perfect marriage, even a few reporters from local papers intrigued by the allegations against a prominent attorney's wife. Robert sat at the plaintiff's table, impeccably dressed as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression a carefully constructed mask of stern disapproval. Beside him, his attorney, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s whose reputation for aggressive tactics preceded her, shuffled papers with theatrical importance. I took my seat beside Jeremy, aware of the whispers that followed my entrance. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, a tailored navy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple chignon. Not the soft, accommodating Eleanor who had hosted Robert's dinner parties, but the Harvard MBA who had quietly outmaneuvered him for decades. All rise, the clerk announced as Judge Harriet Washington entered the courtroom. A no-nonsense woman. In her 60s, Judge Washington was known for her impatience with unnecessary legal theatrics, exactly the kind Robert's team was attempting to employ. "Be seated," she said crisply, surveying the room with practiced neutrality. "We're here to address allegations of financial misconduct in the divorce proceedings of Mitchell versus Mitchell. Before we begin, I want to be clear. I have reviewed the preliminary filings, and I am not impressed with the tactics being employed here. This court will not be used as a weapon in a personal vendetta." Robert's attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor, we respectfully disagree with that characterization. Our client has uncovered evidence of systematic financial deception spanning decades." "Save it for your presentation, counselor," Judge Washington interrupted. "You'll have your chance to present evidence, as will the defense. Let's proceed with opening statements." What followed was a masterclass in legal theater. Robert's attorney painted me as a calculating manipulator who had spent 40 years systematically hiding assets while presenting a facade of wifely devotion. She produced charts showing the growth of my offshore accounts, tax returns bearing Robert's signature, and testimony from financial experts questioning how a housewife with no financial training could have managed such sophisticated investments. Throughout her presentation, I maintained a calm, attentive expression, making occasional notes for Jeremy but otherwise betraying no emotion. Robert, in contrast, became increasingly agitated as the morning progressed, leaning forward to whisper urgently to his attorney, his face flushing with barely controlled anger. When it was Jeremy's turn, he approached the bench with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, my client has been accused of criminal misconduct based on nothing more than her husband's wounded pride and financial greed. The evidence will show not only that Mrs. Mitchell's financial dealings were entirely lawful, but that Mr. Mitchell was aware of them throughout their marriage." He began methodically dismantling each allegation, introducing evidence of my Harvard MBA, my early career at Morgan Stanley, and the careful documentation that had accompanied every investment decision I'd made over 40 years. David Levinson took the stand to explain the forensic analysis of our tax returns, demonstrating that all income had been properly reported and all taxes paid in full. Furthermore, Jeremy continued, Mrs. Mitchell maintained separate property throughout the marriage, property inherited from her grandmother, which Mr. Mitchell repeatedly disparaged as not worth the trouble. It was this separate property that formed the basis for her independent investments, all of which were properly documented and reported on tax returns that Mr. Mitchell signed each year. By lunchtime, the momentum had shifted palpably. Judge Washington's initial skepticism had transformed into something like grudging respect as she reviewed the documentation Jeremy presented. Robert's attorney appeared, increasingly flustered, abandoning parts of her prepared argument as Jeremy systematically undermined her key points. Robert himself sat rigid with fury, his earlier confidence replaced by a dawning realization that his strategy had backfired spectacularly. When our eyes met briefly across the courtroom, I saw something I had never witnessed in 40 years of marriage: genuine fear. He had gambled everything on the assumption that I would crumble under pressure, that the docile, accommodating wife he remembered would accept his terms rather than face public scrutiny. Instead, he had awakened a formidable opponent he hadn't known existed, a woman with the financial acumen to match his legal expertise and the quiet strength to withstand his intimidation tactics. When court reconvened after lunch, Robert's attorney requested a brief recess to confer with her client. Judge Washington granted it with visible impatience, instructing both parties to return in 15 minutes. Jeremy turned to me as the courtroom emptied. They're looking for an exit strategy. This isn't going their way, and they know it. What do you think they'll propose? I asked. A settlement, probably close to our original terms, with some face-saving concession for Robert. Jeremy studied my expression carefully. Are you prepared to consider it? I thought about the months I'd spent in St. Lucia, rebuilding my life piece by piece. About Thomas, waiting patiently for my return. About the microfinance initiative that had given me purpose beyond being someone's wife or mother. Yes, I said finally, but on one condition. I want a public retraction of all allegations against me. Not just a dismissal of charges, but an acknowledgement that they were unfounded. Jeremy nodded, understanding the importance of this stipulation. It'll be a bitter pill for Robert to swallow, but given the alternative. When Robert and his attorney returned, their body language told the story before a word was spoken. The swagger was gone, replaced by the grim resignation of strategists who had miscalculated badly. Your Honor, Robert's attorney began, in light of the evidence presented this morning, my client wishes to withdraw the allegations of financial misconduct. We believe this matter can be resolved through mediation, rather than further court proceedings. Judge Washington's gaze was piercing. Are you stating for the record that the allegations against Mrs. Mitchell were without merit? The attorney hesitated, glancing at Robert, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Yes, Your Honor. Based on the documentation provided by Mrs. Mitchell's counsel, we acknowledge that her financial dealings were lawful and appropriately disclosed. I see. Judge Washington turned her attention to me. Mrs. Mitchell, are you amenable to returning to mediation to resolve the remaining issues in your divorce? I am, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steady. Provided that today's acknowledgement becomes part of the official record. So ordered, she said briskly. Counsel will prepare a stipulation dismissing these allegations with prejudice, to be filed by close of business tomorrow. We'll schedule a follow-up hearing to review progress on the mediated settlement in 30 days. She brought down her gavel with finality. Court is adjourned. As the room cleared, Robert remained seated, staring straight ahead, his features frozen in a mask of controlled fury. I gathered my belongings, prepared to leave without speaking to him. But he rose suddenly, blocking my path to the door. You won, he said quietly, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Happy now? I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in our 40 years together. I saw not the distinguished attorney, the pillar of the community, the man whose approval I had sought so desperately for so long, but an aging, bitter man who had never truly seen me at all. This wasn't about winning, Robert, I said gently. It was about finally being seen. I walked past him then, out of the courtroom and into the bright spring sunshine, where Catherine waited with a relieved smile and open arms. Is it over? She asked as we walked to her car. Not entirely, I admitted, but the worst is behind us. Are you going back to St. Lucia? I nodded, feeling the weight of Boston, its memories, its obligations, its constraints, already lifting from my shoulders. My life is there now. My work with the microfinance initiative, my friends, I hesitated, not yet ready to explain about Thomas. Catherine smiled knowingly. Your freedom. Yes, I agreed, surprised by her perception. My freedom. As we drove through the familiar streets of Boston, past landmarks that had once defined my existence as Mrs. Robert Mitchell, I felt a curious detachment. This city had been my prison and my home for 40 years, the backdrop against which I had slowly disappeared into the role assigned to me. Now, as I prepared to leave it once more, I carried with me not the burden of invisibility, but the lightness of possibility. Robert had intended his legal maneuvering to drag me back into his orbit, to punish me for daring to reclaim my independence. Instead, he had given me the opportunity to demonstrate, to him, to our children, to myself, exactly who Eleanor Fairchild had been all along. A woman of substance, a financial strategist, a Harvard MBA who had outmaneuvered one of Boston's most prominent attorneys at his own game. Never again would I allow myself to be diminished for someone else's comfort. Never again would I accept invisibility as the price of belonging. As Catherine's car turned onto the highway leading away from downtown, I gazed at the receding skyline and made a silent promise to the young woman I had been, the one who had surrendered her dreams so willingly 40 years ago. I would live the rest of my life in the full light of my own capabilities, answerable only to myself. And that, I realized, with quiet certainty, was the most complete victory of all. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in a sunlit conference room in New York City, surveying the audience of financial professionals who had gathered for the Women in Investment Summit. My hands rested lightly on the polished wood as I prepared to deliver the keynote address. In the front row, Thomas smiled encouragingly, his quiet presence a steady anchor in this new chapter of my life. 20 years ago, I began, I was managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio from a corner of my family room, surrounded by cookbooks and children's sports schedules. My husband, a prominent attorney, signed tax returns I prepared without reading them, dismissing my financial acumen as a quaint hobby. My investments grew steadily, quietly, while I played the role assigned to me: corporate wife, perfect hostess, invisible support system. A knowing murmur rippled through the audience, women of various ages nodding in recognition. Today, I stand before you as the founder of Second Chapter Financial, a consulting firm specializing in helping women navigate financial independence after major life transitions. Our client list has grown from 3 to 312 months. Our microfinance initiative in the Caribbean has funded over 70 female entrepreneurs. And yes, the offshore accounts my ex-husband tried so desperately to claim remain firmly under my control. Laughter and applause filled the room, warming me from the inside out. These women understood what I was really saying, that financial independence wasn't just about money, but about reclaiming power in a world designed to keep it from us. Ladies, I concluded, they may underestimate us. They may dismiss our capabilities. They may assume we'll break under pressure, but that is their mistake, not our destiny. The best revenge isn't just living well, it's living authentically, on your own terms, with your full potential finally unleashed. The standing ovation that followed felt like validation, not just of my speech, but of the journey I'd taken to reach this moment. As I stepped down from the stage, Maya Chen approached with a professional smile that barely contained her excitement. That was perfect, Eleanor. We've already had 6 conference attendees request consultations with the firm, and the Wall Street Journal reporter wants to schedule an interview for their Women to Watch feature. Schedule whatever you think is appropriate, I replied, still adjusting to the role of public figure after decades of calculated invisibility. But make sure to prioritize the Singapore trip next month. The expansion of our microfinance program can't wait. Maya nodded, making notes on her tablet. At 33, she had become more than just my financial advisor. She was now a partner in Second Chapter Financial, bringing technical expertise and youthful energy to complement my experience and client connections. Together, we had built something neither of us could have created alone. As we moved through the post-keynote reception, accepting congratulations and exchanging business cards, I caught sight of Thomas chatting amiably with a group of investment bankers. He'd flown in from St. Lucia specifically for this event, rearranging his schedule without complaint to support my professional milestone. The contrast with Robert couldn't have been starker, a partner who celebrated my success rather than demanding I diminish myself to enhance his stature. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Catherine. "Killed it, Mom. Emma's school report on inspiring women in finance, featuring her grandmother, just got an A+. So proud of both of you." I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. Catherine had emerged from the divorce stronger and more independent, reassessing her own marriage and career with new eyes. She'd recently been promoted to regional sales director at her pharmaceutical company, a position she'd previously avoided because it meant more travel and less time managing her household. "Life's too short to play small," she'd told me during our last visit. "You taught me that." Andrew had been slower to adjust to the new family dynamic, but had eventually come around, particularly after Robert's increasingly erratic behavior made maintaining the perfect family facade impossible. Last month, he'd called to ask my advice about investment options for his children's college funds, a small gesture that acknowledged my financial expertise in a way he never had before. As for Robert, the divorce had been finalized 6 months after the hearing where his allegations against me were withdrawn. The settlement was exactly what I'd originally proposed: fair division of marital assets, my overseas accounts and inherited properties remaining separate, and a clean break, with no ongoing financial entanglement. He and Vanessa had indeed moved to Florida, purchasing a waterfront condo in Palm Beach that, according to mutual friends, they could barely afford after the divorce settlement depleted Robert's resources. His planned semi-retirement had evolved into a desperate scramble for new clients, his reputation in Boston legal circles tarnished by the public humiliation of his failed financial misconduct claims against me. I took no pleasure in his struggles. 40 years of marriage, however unbalanced, couldn't be erased by a year of independence. I sometimes found myself wondering if things might have been different had I asserted myself earlier, had I refused to become invisible in my own life from the beginning. But such thoughts were futile. The past was immutable. Only the future remained in play. And what a future it was shaping up to be. Thomas joined me as the reception wound down, slipping his hand comfortably into mine. Ready to celebrate properly? I've made reservations at that French place you mentioned wanting to try. Perfect, I agreed, gathering my belongings. Maya, will you join us for dinner? We should toast today's success. I wish I could, she said, genuinely regretful. But I have a video meeting with potential investors for the Singapore expansion. Rain check? Absolutely. Let me know how the call goes. As Thomas and I walked through the lobby of the conference center, a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. Eleanor. I turned to find Vanessa standing by the entrance, looking oddly diminished despite her designer outfit and carefully maintained appearance. Her face was thinner than I remembered, new lines etched around her eyes and mouth. Vanessa, I acknowledged with neutral politeness. This is unexpected. I know. She glanced nervously at Thomas, who maintained a protective presence beside me. I was in the city for a salon industry event and saw your name on the conference schedule, I thought. I hoped we might talk. I hesitated, years of conditioning urging me to accommodate her request, despite everything that had transpired between us. Thomas squeezed my hand gently, a silent reminder that I no longer needed to prioritize others' needs above my own. I have dinner plans, I said finally. Perhaps another time. Please. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. Just 5 minutes. Things with Robert. They're not what I expected. Something in her expression, a mixture of desperation and regret, softened my resolve. Thomas, would you mind giving us a moment? I'll meet you outside. Once we were alone, Vanessa seemed to struggle for words, her usual confidence notably absent. You look amazing, she said finally. Nothing like the Eleanor I remember. That's because I'm not her anymore, I replied simply. She nodded, her gaze dropping to her clasped hands. Robert talks about you constantly, compares me to you. Nothing I do measures up to the perfect wife he supposedly had. I couldn't help the ironic laugh that escaped me. After 40 years of taking me for granted, now he remembers my virtues. How convenient for him. He's drinking too much, Vanessa continued, her voice low. The Florida property is mortgaged to the hilt. His new practice isn't taking off the way he expected. He blames you for everything. The lost clients, the damaged reputation, the financial struggles. And you? I asked, genuinely curious. What do you think? She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. I think we made a terrible mistake, both of us. We destroyed something precious, your friendship, your marriage, for a fantasy that turned out to be just that, a fantasy. I stood silent, absorbing her words. There had been a time when hearing this confession would have brought me vindication, perhaps even satisfaction. Now it simply felt sad, a cautionary tale of lives derailed by misplaced priorities and unexamined choices. "I'm sorry, Vanessa," I said finally, meaning it. "For both of you. But I can't help you with this." "I know," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know that you were right to leave, right to build this new life for yourself. And that I—" She paused, swallowing hard. "I miss my friend. The woman who knew me before I became this person I barely recognize." The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way our decades of friendship had rarely been. I thought of the microfinance initiative, of the women I'd helped guide toward independence and self-sufficiency. Could I offer the same compassion to someone who had betrayed me so profoundly? "Take care of yourself, Vanessa," I said gently. "That's the first step toward finding your way back, to yourself, if not to the life you thought you wanted." She nodded, wiping discreetly at her eyes. "Congratulations on your success, Eleanor. You deserve it. You always did." I watched her walk away, a strange sense of closure settling over me. The anger and betrayal that had fueled my initial departure had long since burned away, replaced by something calmer and more sustaining, the quiet confidence of a woman who finally understood her own worth. Thomas was waiting patiently outside, his expression curious but not intrusive. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, taking his arm. "Just tying up loose ends." Over dinner, we discussed the upcoming Singapore trip, the potential expansion of Second Chapter Financial into Europe, and Thomas's ongoing marine conservation work in St. Lucia. Our lives had developed a comfortable rhythm, 3 weeks together. In St. Lucia, 1 week apart as I traveled for business, occasional trips taken together when our schedules aligned. "I've been thinking," Thomas said as we lingered over dessert, "about making a more permanent arrangement." My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of arrangement?" He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "The kind where I don't have to say goodbye to you every few weeks, where we wake up together every morning, not just when our calendars permit." "Are you proposing?" I asked, surprising myself with the directness of the question. Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm suggesting we consider the possibility. Not marriage necessarily, unless that's what you want, but a commitment to building a life together, however that looks for us." I considered his words carefully. After 40 years of traditional marriage, the freedom to design a relationship based on mutual respect rather than societal expectations was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'd like that," I said finally. "But I need you to understand something. Important. I won't give up what I've built. My work, my independence, my identity separate from any relationship, those aren't negotiable anymore." "I wouldn't want you to," he assured me. "I fell in love with Eleanor Fairchild, financial strategist and independent woman. Not with someone's wife or mother or grandmother. Just you, exactly as you are." The simple truth of his statement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. To be seen, to be valued for exactly who I was, it was the thing I'd craved most throughout my marriage to Robert, the thing I'd finally claimed for myself after walking away. "Then yes," I said, squeezing his hand. "Let's build something together." Later that night, as we walked through the city streets back to our hotel, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Maya had forwarded a press release announcing Robert's law firm was closing its doors due to insurmountable financial challenges. The message contained no commentary, just the link with a subject line reading, "FYI." I deleted it without opening the attachment, feeling neither triumph nor regret. Robert's fate was no longer my concern, just as mine was no longer his to control. We had each made our choices and would live with the consequences, his growing increasingly bitter in the wreckage of his carefully constructed image, mine expanding into spaces I hadn't dared occupy for decades. The following morning, as Thomas and I prepared to check out of our hotel, the front desk attendant handed me an envelope that had been delivered by courier. Inside was a formal invitation to join the board of directors for a prestigious international finance organization, along with a personal note from the chairwoman. Your keynote yesterday convinced us you're exactly the voice we need. Women who've reclaimed their power after years of invisibility speak with unique authority. Please consider joining us. I showed the invitation to Thomas, who read it with evident pride. Are you going to accept? I think I will, I said, already mentally rearranging my schedule to accommodate this new opportunity. It's time to help other women avoid spending 40 years in the shadows. As we stepped out into the bright spring morning, I felt a lightness that had nothing to do with the offshore accounts that had provided my escape route. Money had been the tool, not the destination, the means to reclaim my identity, not the measure of my worth. The real triumph wasn't financial independence, though that had certainly smoothed the path. It was the simple, profound recognition that I had always been more than Mrs. Robert Mitchell. I had always possessed the intelligence, the capability, the strength to stand on my own. I had simply forgotten to believe it. Now, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was, building a business that helped other women claim their own power, I understood the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to become the person you were meant to be before the world told you to be someone else. And Robert? He would have to live with the knowledge that the woman he had dismissed as just a housewife had outsmarted him at every turn, building a financial safety net right under his nose while he was too busy being important to notice. Some might call it revenge. I preferred to think of it as justice, the natural consequence of underestimating someone simply because you never bothered to truly see them. As our car pulled away from the curb, heading toward the airport and our next adventure, I didn't look back. The past had nothing left to teach me. The future, with its endless possibilities, was calling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.